I appreciate this opportunity because I'm always trying to think about the connections between neuroscience and psychology and marketing. And it's this ongoing thing of trying to integrate the two. And it can be very powerful to understand how the brain processes information in the world of marketing. So this was the original kind of focus. I always want to talk about the neuroscience and psychology of marketing. But as I wrote this, I see that it is really about a brain-based argument for advertising creativity. So I want to promote the idea that we need to have creativity in advertising. A lot of times you have to fight for it and really argue for it and work for it and even understand the nuances of what creativity means, which often we don't agree on. And you can use the insights from the brain as well as marketing sciences to inform why creativity is so necessary. So this is basically the argument and the outline that I want to make today. It is that the majority of ads are processed without our conscious awareness. And the role of creativity is to make ads easy to process. And oftentimes when people talk about this, they're talking about creativity as this way to get people's attention and you need to do something super weird and crazy. And that's what creativity does. And that's what attention means to be effective in advertising. But really the role is to make it easy and not require as much attention as possible. The key important thing is to be recognized. So there are many goals that you can create in marketing, like having people love your product and buy your product and report on certain aspects of it. But really, when it comes down to it, the most important thing is that they recognize who you are when they see you. And that's the very first step, right? You need to recognize who you are. And then you don't have to necessarily set the goal of let's purchase that product. If you simply say, I want people to think about my product when they're going to buy it, then that's enough. That's enough of a goal because people aren't monogamous with the brands that they choose. They choose a bunch of different ones. And so just being considered and being noticed at the grocery store or when you think about a service that you're going to buy is the key thing. So the role of brand is to frame and shape people's perceptions. And the product's experience is just as important as your marketing communications are. So I'm going to talk a lot about communications and brand building and marketing, but the product experience is the other half, and that's also very important, and it informs the messaging that we make at the advertising level. So when it comes down to it at the end of the day, every single thing that you could do in marketing involves perception and behavior. There's no single goal that you can mention that you want to have that doesn't involve perception and behavior, whether it's buying more of a product, buying a product that you've never bought before, telling somebody about it, and so on. And one of the most influential marketing thinkers was Roy Alderson in the early 1900s. And he was super influential in marketing, and at the same time, he deeply understood the importance of understanding human psychology for marketing. So this is his quote, and every phase of marketing can be understood as human behavior within the framework of some operating system, and survival and growth are implicit goals of every behavior system, including most particularly those that operate in the marketplace. So there's two key points here is that the decisions that we make in the marketplace are some of the most important decisions in the sense that it is our time and it's our money that's at stake. So when our money is on the line, then it's an important thing. And the second key thing that he recognized here, which is pretty advanced, is that survival and growth are implicit goals of every behavioral system. So the function of the brain, this is advanced even if it was coming from a neuroscientist at this time, but the function of the brain being to be aware of what is relevant in the environment for that individual, their own survival and growth and their own individual benefit. And he actually says that it's implicit goals. So it's always operating and it's always happening, even though it's not something that we explicitly will recognize. Sometimes, in fact, we're not incentivized to fully understand the reasons why we do the things that we do. And the reasons that we say we do them don't align with the underlying true reasons that we do them. When you think about advertising, it is about putting up an ad or putting up a commercial, and we want to ask, what is the impact of the brain? And we assume that if somebody attends to it and they process it, then there's going to be a brain response to that ad. And when I came up in grad school, I studied attention, and I was at UC Davis, and there was a lot of guys who came from the big labs that studied how to measure attention, which again is to say when you put something in front of somebody, how well does it actually change what the brain is doing. And it was widely known, although it wasn't really like published formally, but it was known that if you're going to do a study where you want to measure the impact of attending to something on the brain, you don't have people like super hyper focus on something. So intuitively we think, oh, if it's about attention, it needs to be like you're trying really hard. But that's not if you actually measure the brain activity while people are trying to process something in the world, that's not what leads to the largest brain activity. So what happens is that when you're relaxed and when you're in a passive kind of autopilot state, that's when the environment can most likely engage and alter your brain activity. And so to study attention, I would try to tell people, this doesn't mean that you're going to attend super hard. Relax, get them to practice, and I'd actually have them listen to music at the same time that they did the experiment. And it's all because when you get in that mode of understanding the link between your perception and how you click the mouse on the button, and you're not thinking about it very much, then you're letting all that information in. And that's really what attention is, even though that's usually not what we think about attention. So this is, we would put these sensors on the scalp. So each of these circles is a sensor and measure brain activity, tiny electrical fluctuations that happen across the scalp. So all of our brains are doing this right now as we go about the world and right now as we sit there. And actually it's happening 10 times faster than it shows on this computer screen because our computer monitors are designed based on our time scales of perception, not based on how fast the brain works. So it's constantly doing something. The brain is constantly doing something faster than we can even appreciate. And this is a study that really brings that home, a famous study by Michael Gazzaniga with a split brain patient. So what they found is that you can present information entirely to one hemisphere. And in this patient, because they had epilepsy, they split the middle. And so that this hemisphere sees what's presented, but the other hemisphere doesn't see what's presented. And because the other hemisphere is involved in speaking, they're unable to say what they saw, even though the person can write down what they saw. So they see a vehicle, and they can write it down with their hand, but they can't say and report, I saw a vehicle. So all this processing is happening under the surface to represent the world, and the idea of verbally saying what we saw is like a completely separate little piece.
What we can do is putting information into his disconnected, mute, non-talking right hemisphere and watch it produce behaviors. And out of that, we can really see that there is, in fact, a reason to believe that there's all kinds of complex processes going on outside of his conscious awareness of his left half brain. Everything to the right of the point goes to his left brain, the dominant hemisphere for language and speech. So we can see here that when we flash a word or a picture, Joe is easily able to name it. Now, when a word or a picture falls to the left of a fixation point, that information goes to his disconnected right half brain. And as we can see here, Joe is unable to name it. Joe is able to draw the picture with his left hand, the left hand getting its major control from the right half brain. What'd you draw?
Okay.
What'd you see?
Wheel on one side. I don't know what I saw on the other.
So even though he can't name it, his left hand is able to draw out a picture of the stimulus of the picture or word that we presented to his right half brain. What we have with Joe is just a dramatic example of a neurologic case that really allows you this window into the non-conscious and how powerful non-conscious processes are at influencing our conscious self, our personal self. What Joe and patients like him, and there are many of them, teaches us is that the mind is made up of a constellation of independent, semi-independent agents, and that these agents, these processes can carry on a vast number of activities outside of our conscious awareness. Even though that goes on, there's some final stage or some final system, which I happen to think is in the left hemisphere, that pulls all of this information together into a theory. It has to generate a theory to explain all of these independent elements. And so, and that theory becomes our particular theory of ourself and of the world.
There's a bunch that's going on in the way that the brain processes the world, and then there's a little piece that produces language. And in us, it's all connected to each other, so that goes into our language system, and we can say it's a car. But the point is that it's doing all that processing anyway, and sometimes you can't even report what it is. And acknowledging that there's these two different things going on. And here I'm talking about it in terms of the implicit and explicit. So implicit, generally, we use to talk about stuff like images and symbols and video and kind of complicated things. Contextual things like meta communication, for example. And explicit is the language and the very specific words that we use that represent stuff. So the idea he's saying is that the implicit is very big and the explicit is at kind of top of the glacier there. And we always fall into this trap of focusing on that very top piece, the explicit, and we disregard all of the implicit stuff that's happening about how we actually process the world. So this is a Daniel Dennett quote. The standard trap is to suppose that the relatively rare cases of conscious practical reasoning are a good model for the cases in which our intentional actions emerge from processes into which we have no access. And so I'll, as I go along, hopefully it becomes more clear how we fall into that trap and the right way that we need to look at it in order to help see how the brain really processes information. But one of the key things is that this system in the brain, this implicit system, has huge storage capacity. And this was surprising to scientists. Anytime there's a very big capacity for remembering information, we take notice. So this study, they showed people 2,500 pictures over the course of 2.5 hours. And then after the delay, they asked, did you see this picture or this one? And they were able to report 90% of the images that they seen. So you see over 2,000 images, and you can report back that you remember almost 2,000 of them. So it's a huge amount of information that gets processed in there and remembered through this system that's not necessarily coupled to the language that we use to be able to fully understand what was happening. This first point is that the majority of these ads are processed without conscious awareness because the brain spends the majority of its time processing this world in an unconscious way. So we're designed to automatically monitor the world in a low kind of passive attention way to understand what's going on. And only rarely are we kind of consciously let known what's happening through our thoughts that appear. And the role of creativity then is to make ads easy to process as possible. Because that's how we're going about the world, that's what we do, then you want to align with the notion that your customers, that's where your customers are at, and that's where people are at. So with Intermark Group, this is an example of a lot of implicit information. So this is only the visuals of the ad that we did for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama, and it's not showing the voiceover. But the point is that, again, when we think about this system that's processing the world without much effort, it's viewing this image and it's taking in all the separate images. It has that capacity to remember the images, as I showed, and it's taking home a key message, which is that your healthcare is related to your ability to go out there in the world and be successful and perform in the mud run, right? So we're making this connection that it's not, it's about really what healthcare is for, which is about not just your health, but your ability to go out and do all these things that you really want to do and perform and so on. So every image is thought and designed to really embed these two concepts together, and all of that information is coming in through this implicit system that's understanding what's going on, where we might not necessarily be super aware of what's happening. But it's a powerful system to communicate with. So this is a study where they had people fixate on the center, and either they had them attend to the advertisement on one side, or they had them do a task on the other side. And what they found is that, so that the task could be like count the number of green symbols on the left. And what they found is that their ability to remember the information that was in the ad wasn't impacted by whether they focused on it or not. So even when they were doing this other task over here, that information still came through. It came in through the brain, through this implicit processing system. And even when they're asked about words that are related to the concepts that were shown here, those concepts are also brought into memory. And so concepts is, as that previous example was shown, we're connecting these concepts of healthcare lets you go out and be a top performer, take care of your health. And it can always, there's tons of different ways. If you look at all these different fields that people have divided these two separate processes. And pilot and autopilot is another. If you're in the marketing, there's the notion of brand identity and brand image. Brand identity is more along that implicit autopilot thing, and brand image is more above the pilot. But there's a reason all these separate fields have came upon this notion that there are these two separate things, and there's one that's kind of has more of an impact. And I call it autopilot here because intuitively we understand what autopilot means. So when I'm on autopilot, it's like you're driving and you don't think about what you're doing, but your brain is taking in all that information, so that attention is happening because you understand that when something deviates, you're going to move the wheel and move the brakes however you need to. But much more stuff that we do comes in on autopilot. So anything that you get heavily trained on, essentially the act of training is the act of making it into your autopilot. So of course it's like music. But even for you guys, when all the stuff that you guys do besides listening to boring people talk up here in your classes is helping you train so that at some intuitive level you can have that ability to public speak and engage in the sort of complex things that you have to do in the work setting where you have to talk to people and come up with the right idea at the right time. So that's all about the autopilot, and that's why experience is such an important thing. So the thing is that TV is passive engagement, right? So when we think about autopilot, the main thing that we will think about is television. That's kind of what we do, is we relax and we veg out on it. And so I want to argue that that's actually a benefit of television because, and just to demonstrate, the study showed that we directed 38 to 46 of the amount of active attention to TV as we did to print ads. So we focused more attention on print ads than we did on television. So it's a passive form of entertainment, but it's also one of the most effective forms of advertising. So here is the link between effectiveness for all these different mediums, and TV is right there as the most effective one out of all of them. And also because it has the biggest reach. You guys know that the largest number of people see TV commercials. But if you think about it, there's a relationship between all those things, right? Because the reason the large number of people see TV commercials is because watching TV is an easy passive thing. So we're willing to be entertained for hours per day. And so they're all kind of interrelated with each other. TV also has the biggest long-term impact of the other mediums that you can use in marketing. And when I talk about the brain systems that are used to passively process information, all those implicit images, those brain systems are durable, and they, like I showed, they have a good capacity for remembering the images, and they hold on to it for longer. So most likely that's the reason why TV has a longer long-term impact and why this creative brand building is so effective in marketing. So the whole point is that we have tons of passive attention. We go about the world passively attending. And that means that if your ads facilitate that, if your ads make it easy to continue to passively attend without doing much effort, then you're going to engage a large number of people. But if you try to get people to really pay attention to your messaging and to your advertisement, then the people who pay attention are going to be a small number of people who are actually actively attending. And the act of very strongly actively attending happens in very short bursts. So it's simply based on where people are at in the world, it's not a super effective approach to take. So these are the kind of two distinctions that I made: the implicit autopilot and the explicit pilot, and the notion that this is always on, so you always have the ability to communicate with it, and it's low effort, and it's more durable, so the memories can last longer, and it's nonverbal as opposed to explicit, which is brief and it's high effort, less durable, and it's verbal information, more heavily verbal. But the key thing is that implicit is the majority of the processing and explicit is a small amount of processing. So creativity is like the biggest impact that you can make on making your commercials effective. So you can increase your share of market, so your profitability, by a factor of 11 just by having great creativity in the advertisement. And that really speaks to the importance of putting information out there that aligns with how we implicitly process information, and that's easy to process. So there's tons of data out there that shows why creativity is more important in advertising, and this kind of helps us answer. This one specifically looked at if you're talking about trying to tell people why the product is good through words or through spoken words or through visual words, then it's much less effective here in the explicit case than the top ads that did a good job of implicitly communicating information creatively were the best performing ones. So the data is there also to show that when you do a great job of being creative and communicating in this kind of symbolic implicit way without specifically telling people what the benefits are, it's more effective. And there's one of the additional things is that, when I talked about that glacier and the idea that we often make that mistake of focusing on the top of it and not being able to see all that's underneath. One of the most frustrating things is that when people talk about emotion, they seem to be talking about, when we think of emotion, we think of like getting into a car accident or something like really bad that happened, like the most angry I've been in the past month. But emotion is something that happens all the time. It's something that helps us go about the world as we go about the world, including when we're passively just sitting there watching TV. Emotion is something that is keeping us engaged with the TV program, but it's at a very subtle level, right? And so this is the famous emotions researcher, Antonio Damasio, and he says, all the devices which produce emotion can be engaged automatically without conscious deliberation. So we don't have to super strongly attend to things to feel emotion, and emotion doesn't have to be this super intense thing. It can go along with when we simply, the ad that I showed, I would argue that this is a very emotional ad, looking at the imagery in the sense that it's compelling imagery that is engaging, and it simply is something that you can passively focus on, and you don't have to try to block it out. You don't have to try to ignore it. So majority of ads are processed without conscious awareness. The role of creativity is to make ads easy to process, not to like do something super weird that gets our attention. And the most important thing is to be recognized and to get in consideration set. So they have to identify who the brand is. That's the most important thing. And if they can think of it when they're thinking of making a purchase, then you've done your job. And that's kind of like the Coca-Cola model of basically trying to be everywhere, right? So it's been said that if thinking about what Coca-Cola's approach or strategy is, it's that you shouldn't be able to walk more than 100 yards in any city without seeing a Coke can, bottle, or logo. So putting that information out there allows it to be recognizable, and that's the single most important thing that most likely contributes to why Coke is the soda that people think of. But the key thing is that it has to have that logo that's recognizable, has to have consistency in how you see it so that you recognize it as Coke. And Coca-Cola even went so far as to shape their bottles very specific ways so that when you see the bottle that you recognize it as Coke. So those are all super important things that you have to think about. And one of the things you could do is you can make your ads a little bit blurry and see if the information that you want to come through is still coming through. Because it's a fiction, the idea that we think that the brain takes like a perfect picture of what's going on in the world, like a camera. But actually it's only taking a very detailed picture of the foveal region, and all the periphery is fuzzy, but it makes us think that it's all filled in and that we all understand it. It fills in that information for us. So the brain might see something more like this, and if that initial processing of the information that passes through the brain can can perceive what we want it to perceive, then the advertisement will be more effective. And so something as simple as like this for Coors, the entire ad shows the mountain, and it reminds us of Coors, and it's on the can. So you have that every single frame is connected with identifying who it is. So that's the idea that you want to reach as many people as possible, and reaching as many people as possible means making the ads easy to process and using that creativity to do that. And that means that you have penetration. So that's what that means, is reaching the largest and broadest audience possible. And that's the biggest marketing goal that you can create, is to reach the largest audience possible. So this study here showed that if you try to make people loyal and make them love the brand, then they don't have as strong of a business effect as if you simply try to reach the broadest audience as possible. And part of reaching them is to have that great creative that they can process easily without too much effort. So this was advertising awards. They showed that the gold medal winners had the objective and the goal of penetration, again, reaching the largest number of people. And those that didn't win the awards didn't have that goal. They were trying to make people love the brand, right? And if you think about what that means, to make people love the brand, it's like you're trying to tell them, you're trying to get them to think something about it. You're using that explicit approach instead of that implicit approach. So you would think that if you're a niche company, maybe that's where you want to have like people who are super like passionate and loyal. But even if you're a niche company, reaching the largest audience possible is the biggest thing you could do. So that's the key benefit there, is that what the brand is doing is making things really easy for you to navigate the world. And so again, it's not like seeing this and making you love McDonald's. It's about seeing this and be like, I'm super hungry. I'm glad I can go and buy something that I know what I'm going to get, and I can eat some food, because that's what I want right now, is to eat some food. Because if you were hungry and you saw this restaurant and you didn't recognize who it was, like, that would be a big bummer, right? You'd be like, all right, is it any good? Do I have to look at reviews? The fact that it tells you immediately that it's McDonald's says, all right, I know what to expect from this. So when we have the thinking about this notion of the brand and the logo and all those symbols and imagery, they come in and they override the product attributes, the specific details of the product. So basically, the brand helps us make that decision without having to look into all the details. And what happens is that people will see the brand and they'll see enough product details to reinforce the decision in whatever brand they were going to buy anyway. They'll stop looking once they see enough to make that decision. So majority of ads are processed without awareness. Creativity makes ads easy. We want to get recognized. That's the single most important thing. The role of the brand is to frame and shape perception. So I've been alluding to this idea that everything communicates. All the imagery that you use, every choice that you make along the marketing domain is communicating something, because we're always extracting something from the world in that implicit way. And so in the relationships, that's where this is really shown. So the analogy would be, if somebody was to tell you yes, but they shake their head no at the same time, you wouldn't see that as a yes answer. You would be very confused and you wouldn't be happy with that. You'd say, what's going on? So the implicit information, the cues, the body language, the context around it is telling us much more than simply what was verbally said in that case. And it turns out that when in relationships, like when couples argue with each other, it's these meta-communication things, the unalignment between these subtle cues that actually causes the conflict. So if the things that you say are happy and go along with each other, but these subtle body language cues aren't, that's where the conflict happens. And if you want to help a relationship, getting in and helping them recognize the body language and these subtle cues that are communicated is what solves the problem, not just getting them to say what they're supposed to say. So thinking about all the stuff that's going on, this is Michelin's famous thing where because so much is riding on your tires and they've got this baby here. So what's the information that's conveyed by this simple image? It's that, okay, there's a baby and so much is riding on the tires. But thinking about babies brings up the notion of safety, and it brings up the idea of responsibility. So people think about safety, they think about responsibility just from bringing up this information. And safety and responsibility are key, motivators and key goals. So when we talk to people about those things, then they get engaged and they become interested in hearing about it. So our work with Troy University, we did a campaign where we focused on how everybody has childhood dreams, and you want to remember what those dreams are of making a change and being a leader, and Troy can help you do that. And so we created this Lead Change commercial, which the whole idea is that every single image is conveying that notion of leading change and having dreams for change, talking to that implicit system.
We all dream. We dream when we're sleeping, when we're awake. But dreams quickly become distant memories, unless we do something about it. Push ourselves. Believe in something. Do everything in our power. Direct every action and thought we have to learn to lead, to make it real. At Troy University, we offer leadership opportunities from day one. We're dedicated to teaching a new generation to lead change. Do you have what it takes to change the world?
So it's pretty weird to show a Troy commercial to Auburn, but you guys have a better football team. And you guys won, it was Saturday. I watched the game this Saturday. It was really cool. All right. So as I said, all the imagery in there is relating to that singular idea of you have these dreams and we can help you lead. But speaking to that implicit processing and the impact of the images, you'll notice that a lot of the images in the commercial are people that are looking up. And so, we always dive into the academic research when we understand the motivations and the concepts that are behind the ad, whether it's your healthcare that can help you go out and to the world and perform, or whether it's safety that the tires need to help you be safe, or whether it's helping you lead and learn to lead, you can find a lot of helpful information to guide that marketing. So the academic research shows that when people have lofty aspirations and they think about their future and their dreams, they tend to look upward. And when people think about receiving leadership and looking up to somebody, they look up to somebody. So like the word lofty goals, lofty implies kind of lifting, and sounds like a cloud. So these are all concepts that you need to recognize that exist, and then look in and see how those can be creatively expressed. And as I said, it's not just about communicating and making ads. You have to actually be there as the product. And of course, we look at the product, we look at the brand when we create advertisements to figure out what they're going to be about, as well as looking at the customer. That's a main part of advertising is that you do have to do some that's not just brand building, but you have to do more activational kind of things that are more engaging and more in tune with the closeness of the purchase experience. And so we went out to a baseball game and sent out a dream advisor to have somebody talk to people about their career dreams. And so this is taking that idea, that single core idea, and making sure that it's not just something that's out there in a commercial, but it's something that's part of people's actual experience and really drives it home. We got on TikTok too, and when you look at this, you'll see that the take-home message that they get when they view the commercial is that it is about dreams. So these examples that I gave are about the underlying motivators that we have, like safety, dreams, and leadership. And fundamentally, when we go about the world, as I said in the very beginning, we implicitly seek growth and goals and our own personal, we view the world from our personal perspective. So if your advertisements are coming at people at that level where you're communicating with them about goals and motivations, then you have the capability to reach everybody who sees your ad. But if you're creating a commercial that is focused on telling people about your product descriptions, people only care about hearing product descriptions when they're ready to make a purchase at very specific points. And so that commercial will engage a much smaller amount of people. And when we talk about the importance of reaching the largest number of people possible, that's where you have to go into the motivators and the goals and the things that people care about. So majority of ads are processed without conscious awareness. Creativity makes ads easy. We need to get recognized first and foremost. That means consistency. And brand helps frame and shape perception. And then this is all marketing communications, but it's not just about making ads. It's about what you actually deliver. And that's the product experience. And that's the other half. It's just as important. And in terms of ROI, having that goal of building brand, you're putting all the money into those TV commercials, but making sure that you equally devote effort into things that are more activational and more geared towards actual sales to complete the loop is what generates the biggest effect and the biggest impact. So you do need to have both, and there's robust research on that. And usually, like, you're trying to argue with people to be creative and to build your brand because people want to just get that instant sales. Because when you hire some new marketing person, if they try to just drive sales and push money towards sales, then they will outperform in the beginning, but over the long run, they won't be able to do as well. So the marketing person that understands the balance between building that brand and harvesting what you've built by having that things that when people are ready to make the decision at the product level, will be able to build and be successful in the company for multiple years, instead of just being successful for 6 months and then starting to fail. So there's a bunch of research on that, which is super important, and it is for different categories too. But the point is about being consistent, having that consistency. So if you're selling a purse that's super exclusive and special, but you go in to buy it and there's 100 of those purses that are on display, then that clearly goes against the idea that this is something that's exclusive and special. The iPhone has tons of subtle cues that communicate to us what they want to communicate. So when we engage with the phone, we're using our fingers. It's a minor, fine kind of finger movement, and that's the sort of movement that we'll do when we look at a magazine. And so that means that when we do that action, we associate it and we get reminded with the idea of looking through a magazine, and that's like a form of entertainment. So it's bringing up ideas of entertainment. When we swipe on something or scroll and it keeps scrolling, it's kind of like when you're a kid and you like scroll the wheel and it keeps spinning. So it's like a fun thing, and they know that the way that you use the product based on these subtle things tells you how you're supposed to use the product. It tells you it's about entertainment and it's about fun. It's certainly not about work. Whereas the BlackBerry, you use that with your thumbs, and your thumbs are something that you use for like picking up heavy objects. So it's like literally gives you signals that this is about work. So the best way to tell people this phone is about doing work is to understand a lot of these subtle things that are communicating what it is about. One of the interesting things about Elon Musk and the Tesla is that he found out that there was a dealership that was selling them at a discount, and he was adamant about dealerships not discounting the Teslas. So he wrote this whole thing, and famously, he came up with this quote that the acid test is if you can't explain to a customer who paid full price why another customer didn't without being embarrassed, then it's not right. But this is, again, a point about how that final product experience is related to that brand perception, and it should be embedded throughout everything throughout the organization and throughout the marketing communications. And as a marketing strategist, I will go and look at the details of the product and try to get insights that have these kind of bigger picture things that it's trying to communicate, as well as what does the organization look like, what does the founder of the organization look like, and how are they unique, and how can we bring those unique qualities to the surface in terms of their brand and deciding what the commercials are actually going to be about. So that's the story. All of these things. There's even a little key pieces thing. So I hope that made a good amount of sense for you guys. I know that I'm super caffeinated right now, so I might have spoken quickly, or at least I felt like I talked quickly. We do post a bunch of this stuff on our website, and we have a YouTube where we do webinars. So this is what I talked about today is related to the past webinar that we ran, so you could learn more about that stuff. And that's it.
All right, thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions?
I just had a quick question. So obviously, like with ignoring what obviously of course, what company do you think has the best advertising strategy that you've seen in the past like 5 years?
Oh man. I mean, I think the ones that really hold to the idea of fighting for creativity. So you can kind of detect when you go to their websites and you go and see their ads, if they're like, holding the line and saying, this is what we do. We make these creative, exciting advertising pieces. So I think all of the successful ones really, like if you look at the top 10 most successful advertising agencies, the biggest ones, so I guess like Ogilvy and McCann and all of them, they're successful because they do that. So I think,
I had a question.
yeah.
So obviously emotion is important when you're advertising to a potential customer or client. I was wondering if in your experience there's been one specific emotion that's kind of been far and away more effective in maybe commercial or...
I mean, generally any positive, advertisers use positive emotions, so they really shy away from the negative ones. So I think as long as it has that kind of subtle positive spin on it, and there's a bunch of studies that kind of go into decomposing the underlying motivators that we have, like as the idea that safety is one of them. But another one of our motivators, which is tied to emotion, is entertainment. And just like when you're vegging out on your phone, that you are accomplishing some motivation of just like letting your mind relax, and you're enjoying that. And obviously that's like one of the biggest ways one of the biggest motivators that people use on like TV and social media. They acknowledge that that's what they're there for, is to be kind of passively entertained. So that's a big one.
All right. Thank you guys so much for listening.